July 6th, 1944, Saipan, Northern Mariana Islands. For 3 weeks, the Japanese Imperial Army had been pushed northward, squeezed into a shrinking corner of the island as the U.S. Marines and Army advanced relentlessly. The once orderly Japanese defensive line had collapsed into a jigsaw of caves, ravines, shattered bunkers, and burned-out villages. Thousands of Japanese soldiers were hungry, wounded, or delirious from exhaustion. Civilians were mixed among them, terrified and traumatized. And into this chaos stepped the man who believed he could still win. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saitō, commander of all Japanese forces on Saipan, sat inside a dim cave lit by a single oil lamp, surrounded by staff officers who knew the truth: they were beaten. American artillery was pulverizing everything north of Tanapag Plain, U.S. Tanks were already prowling the approaches to Makunshon Hill. Naval gunfire from offshore battleships made movement in daylight suicidal. Before we jump, back in. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ammunition was almost gone. Medical supplies had vanished days earlier. The sick and wounded lay in cave mouths, in such numbers that officers could barely step around them. But still, Saitō had one card left: Gyokusai, the honorable death charge, known to Americans as a Banzai attack. He stood slowly, gripping the cave wall for balance. His uniform, once immaculate, hung in tatters. "We shall advance to attack the American devils," he said. "All will die with honor." He bowed stiffly toward the imperial portrait, then turned to his officers. "Those unable to attack shall kill themselves." No one protested. In 3 weeks of combat, Saitō had seen 2/3 of his army destroyed. He had no illusions about victory, but he believed one last attack, one all-or-nothing charge, could at least restore some measure of honor. He also believed something else. The Americans were exhausted. He thought they were stretched across extended lines and vulnerable to sudden breakthrough. Japanese intelligence estimated that the Marines were debilitated by heat, casualties, and constant combat. If a single shockwave of 3,000 to 4,000 Japanese troops ripped through the American positions in the dead of night, perhaps the U.S. beachhead could be rolled back, supply lines severed, and the enemy forced toward the sea. It was wishful thinking bordering on delusion, but in that cave, surrounded by officers who understood the Emperor's expectations, no one dared challenge the general. Outside, word of the coming attack spread rapidly through the caves. Some soldiers embraced the idea with fanatic zeal. Others, mostly wounded, barely able to stand, wept as they sharpened bayonets or tied explosive satchel charges around their waists. A few civilians overheard the announcement. They prepared their own death charges. What Saitō envisioned as a disciplined final assault quickly mutated into something far more chaotic, a massive, desperate human wave driven by despair as much as purpose. On the American side, the night began like many others, humid, tense, and unevenly quiet. Marines from the 27th Infantry Division and the 105th Infantry Regiment lay dug in along a ragged defensive line on the northern plain. They were tired, but confident. Saipan was nearly won. The Japanese were cornered in a tiny pocket of land. The end seemed close. But some Marines sensed something different in the air that night. Private Jim Colby of the 105th would later recall, "It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your guts go cold." A few minutes later, they heard distant chanting from the caves, rolling, rhythmic, growing louder. At first, it sounded like singing, then shouting, then screaming. Banzai. The word carried, across the plain like a wave of thunder. Marines snapped awake, grabbing rifles. Machine gunners kicked boxes of ammunition open with their boots. Officers ran along the line yelling, "Stand by! Fix bayonets!" At 4:30 a.m., just before dawn, the ground itself began to tremble. Thousands of Japanese soldiers burst out of the darkness in a long, uneven crescent. Officers with swords held high led the first ranks. Behind them came wounded men, hobbling on makeshift crutches. Behind them came supply clerks, naval workers, even cooks armed with meat cleavers and sharpened bamboo spears. Some carried no weapons at all, only rocks or grenades. It was not a coordinated military formation, it was a tidal wave. American artillery observers saw the movement and shouted coordinates into field telephones. Within seconds, the night erupted. 75mm and 105mm shells crashed down. Mortars arced from behind Marine lines. Machine guns opened, their tracers slicing red and green lines through the darkness. But still, the Japanese came. The first wave smashed directly into the forward line of the U.S. 105th Infantry. The Marines fired point blank, sometimes at distances of only 10 yards, then 5, then 3. Men shot until their rifles overheated, then used them as clubs. Grenades exploded so close that Marines felt fragments slice their own jackets. Private Nicholas McCall fired a Browning automatic rifle until he ran out of ammunition, then swung the weapon like an axe. "They were on us like a flood," he said. "I've never seen so many people rushing in all directions, screaming and swinging bayonets." The Japanese, fueled by adrenaline, pain, and the fanatical indoctrination of Gyokusai, hurled themselves into the American lines with suicidal fury. Some crawled under machine gun barrels to stab gunners. Others leapt over barricades to hack at Marines with swords. One Japanese officer led his men by beating a drum until a Marine shot him point blank with a shotgun. Still, they came. The sheer momentum of 3,000 to 4,000 charging troops eventually cracked a hole in the American line. The Japanese poured through, rushing toward the rear positions where field medics, communications, troops, and supply clerks were stationed men not equipped for close combat. For a brief, terrifying moment, it looked as if Saito's fantasy might come true. U.S. aid stations were overrun, medics dropped stretchers and grabbed pistols. Mortar crews abandoned tubes and fought hand-to-hand with entrenching tools. Radio operators smashed their own equipment to prevent capture. One of the most horrific battlefield incidents of the Pacific War unfolded in this chaos. The massacre of the 105th aid station. Japanese soldiers bayoneted wounded men who could not stand, then turned on the medics. By dawn, the aid station was a slaughterhouse. The breakthrough continued downhill toward the beach. Marines scrambled backward, forming new firing lines, as officers screamed at them to hold position. Ammo runners sprinted back and forth under fire. Machine gun crews slapped belts into red-hot barrels. The night was turning into a nightmare. Just as the Japanese momentum reached its peak, something happened that Saitō had not anticipated. The Marines didn't break. Instead, small groups of U.S. infantry dug in around fields, hedgerows, and burned out machinery, forming improvised strongpoints that slowed the Japanese tide. Machine guns re-established overlapping fields of fire. Sherman tanks rolled in, their .50 caliber guns chattering. A tank commander later said, "They rushed us like ants. I just kept firing the .50 until the barrel warped." Marines from the 2nd and 4th Divisions, hearing the chaos, threw themselves into the fight without orders. Companies that had been positioned for rest suddenly became the backbone of the new defensive line. The Japanese charge, once terrifying in its momentum, now began to dissolve under the weight of overwhelming American firepower. Men armed with bamboo spears found themselves charging into .30 caliber machine guns. Officers with swords attacked tanks. Wounded soldiers who could barely walk tried to crawl forward, only to be cut down. The Banzai attack, the largest of World War II, had begun as a hurricane. Now it was becoming a massacre. By the time the sun rose, the battlefield was a smoking wasteland. Grass burned in small patches. Hundreds of bodies lay scattered across the plain. Japanese soldiers, having lost cohesion, continued attacking in smaller clusters, screaming, "Tenno Hika Banzai!" as they rushed toward Marine lines. But the firepower was simply too overwhelming. Marines used flamethrowers to clear ravines. Riflemen picked off attackers at medium range. Machine gun crews, shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion, kept firing until their last belts were empty. One Marine sergeant recalled, "We killed until we were sick, then we kept killing." Japanese survivors, stunned, burned, and bleeding, stumbled blindly into tank fire. Others tried to retreat back into the hills, only to be cut down by artillery that bracketed every exit route. By 10 a.m., the Banzai attack was finished. The ground was littered with more than 4,300 Japanese bodies, officers, enlisted men, laborers, medics, and the wounded. It was the largest single Banzai charge of the entire Pacific War. It was also the last. After Saipan, the Imperial Army would never again attempt a mass human wave attack on this scale. For the Marines and Army units who had survived, the victory felt hollow. Hundreds of US troops had been killed or wounded. Entire companies were nearly wiped out. The aid station, when recaptured, was a scene so horrific that hardened veterans broke down crying. One corporal later said, "I'd fought for 2 years, but nothing prepared me for what I saw there." American commanders surveyed the field, horrified by the scale of destruction. Gunners who had fired thousands of rounds sat silently, staring at their hands. Medics began triaging the wounded, many of whom were too badly mauled to save. The Banzai charge had failed catastrophically, but at immense cost. The Japanese had gambled everything and lost everything. Yet the battle for Saipan wasn't over. In the days to come, Marines would face something darker than even the Banzai charge: mass civilian suicides, last-stand pockets of snipers, and desperate remnants of an army that no longer had hope, only obedience to death. The gamble had failed, but the nightmare was only beginning. March 7th, 1944. RAF Halesworth, England 0430. Hours. The pre-dawn cold had teeth. Frost glazed the tarmac, crisp and thin like the sugar crust on a crème brûlée. Mechanics shuffled past with their collars raised high, breath streaming like smoke from locomotive stacks. The 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolf Pack, had flown the bloodiest day of their war barely, 24 hours earlier, and no one had slept properly since. Not after what they'd seen, not after what their thunderbolts did. Captain Jack Sable Merriweather stood beside his aircraft, P-47D Gallows Dancer, gloved hands stuffed in his pockets, gaze locked on the monster of a propeller that now defined his squadron's legend. 8 feet long, 4 paddle-shaped blades, a propeller that technically shouldn't have worked on a plane as heavy as the P-47. Yet somehow it had turned the jug into something the Germans had never expected, a 470 miles per hour's demon that dove like a meteor and climbed like it had rockets buried in the wings. Sable reached out and tapped the blade lightly with 2 knuckles. Steel rang softly in the morning dark. "It still freaks me out you love that thing more than your girl back home," Lieutenant Frank Delaney drawled behind him, dragging a cigarette. He blew smoke upward, letting the orange ember paint faint light across his freckled face. Sable smirked. "This thing saved our asses yesterday. If I could marry it, I would." "You'd lose the honeymoon fight," Delaney muttered, flicking ash. Sable couldn't argue. The paddle blade prop was heavier than the previous propeller by a frightening margin. On paper, it threatened to overtorque the engine, disrupt airflow, and make the aircraft sluggish. But something about the aerodynamic curve, the width, the angle, it all combined in a way even Republic's senior engineers hadn't predicted. He couldn't stop replaying the moment it happened. Berlin, 28,000 feet. A Messerschmitt on his tail, the jug screaming its lungs as the altimeter unwound. And then, the dive that no P-47 had ever done before. He swore the airframe had surged in the fall, like it had been waiting months to show everyone what it could really do. A mechanic hustled over, wiping frozen grease on a rag. "Captain Merriweather, Lieutenant Colonel Zemke's expecting you in the briefing. Hut. Mess looks serious this morning." "When isn't it?" Delaney grumbled. But Sable felt the same knot in his stomach. Anything urgent after a bloodbath like yesterday usually meant something bad. Something bigger. The hut was a long, drafty corridor of cigarette haze, cold coffee, and exhausted faces. Pilots filed in quietly, boots thumping on wooden planks. Charts covered the walls: Berlin, Hamburg, Leipzig, Brunswick, all marked with red and blue scribbles from the last 2 months of brutal fighting. Colonel Hub Zemke stood at the front, posture rigid, eyes sharper than broken glass despite looking like he hadn't slept a minute. Beside him, Major Jerry Johnson tapped a pencil against a stack of intelligence papers. The rhythm was too fast, too tense. Zemke cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, take your seats." Conversation died instantly. Sable settled beside Delaney and Lieutenant Jonah Pike, who still had a fresh bandage on his temple from yesterday's canopy. "Shatter," Zemke began. "Yesterday's engagement over Berlin is already being dissected in London, Washington, and probably Berlin. Our losses were heavy. German losses were heavier. But something happened up there that deserves our attention." A low ripple passed through the men. Zemke continued, voice narrowing. "Intel. Reports German pilot debriefs are panicked. Their words, not mine, describe thunderbolts accelerating in dives beyond safe limits, climbing with unprecedented thrust, and executing maneuvers the P-47 should not be physically capable of." Delaney nudged. "Sable, that's you. You did that." Sable ignored him, jaw tight. Zemke turned to the blackboard, where a chalk drawing of the paddle blade propeller dominated the space. "This," Zemke said, tapping the sketch, "is why." Murmurs swelled. Zemke raised a hand. "Let me be absolutely clear. We expected modest improvements. 5, maybe 7 knots. Slightly better climb. Nothing dramatic. But yesterday's real-world data shows performance gains that exceed those predictions by an order of magnitude." He looked at the room like someone wrestling with disbelief. "The Germans now believe the Thunderbolt has a new engine, or a new wing, or some kind of experimental injection system. They do not believe a propeller change could cause what they saw." Sable swallowed hard. He felt the truth of those words in his bones. Zemke held up another paper. A surviving German pilot claimed he saw a P-47 dive so steeply that he expected the wings to rip off, but instead the aircraft pulled up and climbed, overtaking his 109G at full throttle. Pike raised a hand. "Sir, are we saying the Jug can outrun 109 seconds in the vertical now?" Johnson answered. "We're not saying it. The Germans are." Another ripple. Sable's pulse hammered. Zemke resumed. "Command believes yesterday was the first time the Luftwaffe has ever seen the paddle blade prop in mass combat, and they were completely unprepared." He let that hang. But now they know something's changed. The room chilled. War was chess. Once the enemy discovered a surprise piece on the board, they adjusted, sometimes brutally fast. Zemke continued. "Gentlemen, our job now is simple. Exploit this advantage before the Germans field a countermeasure." Maps were rolled out, arrows drawn in. "Today we escort B-17 seconds toward Hanover. Heavy flak expected. Fighter opposition estimated high. You'll be relying on the new props, whether you trust them yet or not." He scanned the room. "Merryweather," Sable snapped straight. "Sir, you demonstrated extreme control in the dive yesterday. I want you leading Blue Flight today. Your job is to probe German response, force them to fight vertical, make them chase you up and down, document how they react." Sable felt a jolt of cold adrenaline. "Yes, sir," Delaney whispered. "Lucky bastard. Or doomed bastard. Hard to tell." Zemke finished briefing with brutal efficiency. "Wheels up in 40 minutes. Gentlemen, let's show them yesterday wasn't a fluke." The sun was a sliver of molten gold behind the horizon by the time Sable walked back out to Gallows Dancer. Mechanics swarmed the aircraft, attaching external tanks and running diagnostic checks. Chief Mechanic Orville Tate wiped oil from his hands. "Props good, cap, engines good. Everything's good except you." Sable blinked. "What's that supposed to mean? You're staring at that propeller again like it's going to confess something." Sable cracked a smile, but Tate held his gaze. "I'm serious. Whatever miracle happened yesterday, Don't expect it to save you twice. Sable nodded slowly. Tate wasn't wrong. In war, lightning rarely struck the same place twice. But what if the propeller wasn't lightning? What if it was the storm? He climbed into the cockpit. The seat was cold enough to bite through the flight suit. He strapped in, hands moving by muscle memory. Switches, levers, throttle back, clear prop. The R-2800 engine roared awake, vibrating the ground beneath them. And again, just like yesterday, Sable felt something subtle in the vibration. The harmonics were different, fuller, stronger. The paddle blade, redistributing torque in a way the old prop never managed. He shook his head. Stop imagining ghosts. Delaney taxied up beside him in his P-47 Lucky 7, tapping his temple twice through the canopy, a silent, "Stay alive." Sable returned the gesture. The runway cleared. The Wolfpack thundered forward as one. And then they were airborne. The sky over Germany looked deceptively peaceful, at 20,000 feet. Clean, light blue, serene. Sable hated it. Those were the skies that killed men. Below them, black specks dotted the land, thin towers of smoke rising from factories as the war machine churned. Blue Flight maintained formation behind the bomber stream. 40 B-17 seconds, glinted in the morning sun, engines droning like a mechanical choir. Pike crackled over the radio. I got movement. 11 o'clock low. Sable scanned left. Shadows. Then sun flashes. Then shapes. 15. No. 20. Messerschmitt BF. 109 Gs rising in a climbing arc like sharks smelling blood. Delaney whistled. Here we go. Sable keyed his mic. Blue Flight, stay tight. Wait for my mark. The 109 seconds approached head-on, banking into attack lines. Their yellow-nosed leader dipped his wing once, signaling the start of the hunt. Sable felt the sharp spike of fear. But beneath that anticipation, his fingers tightened on the throttle. The German leader climbed slightly, clearly intending to slash through the bomber box, except he wasn't watching Blue Flight. Or maybe he was, but still believed the Thunderbolts were too slow to intercept. A fatal assumption. Sable barked, "Blue Flight now!" He shoved the throttle to the firewall. The Thunderbolt lunged forward, like it had been kicked by a giant. Delaney cursed. "Jesus, she jumps!" Pike whooped. "I felt that in my spine." But Sable didn't respond. He was locked in. His target, the leader. Altitude, 21,000 feet. Speed, building. The paddle blade prop bit into the air with a ferocity no one had expected. The jug surged ahead so violently Sable had to lean forward to fight the inertia. A German pilot must have noticed because the whole enemy formation rippled with surprise. They weren't expecting Thunderbolts to accelerate this fast. They weren't expecting Thunderbolts to climb in pursuit. But Blue Flight was doing exactly that. Sable chased the lead 109 into a spiral climb. He felt the G-force trying to crush him, vision tunneling. The 109 danced like a startled wasp. But Sable stayed on him. 20 seconds passed, then 30. Then the German stalled. Just a flicker, just a moment. But a moment was all a good pilot needed. Sable fired a perfectly timed burst. 5 50 caliber streams converged. The 109 blossomed into a fireball. Sable pulled up sharply, breath ragged. Delaney's voice exploded on the radio. "What the hell was that? You climbed with him. Since when do jugs climb with 109 seconds? Sable didn't know how to answer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Because the truth was terrifying. Even he didn't know if this was the pilot or the prop. The remaining Messerschmitts regrouped. 6 of them peeled off and dove straight toward Blue Flight. Sable grinned. They were panicking. They were rushing. They were making mistakes. He keyed his mic. "Blue Flight, form on me. Vertical scissors. Push them into a dive." "You want to dive against 109 seconds?" Pike said nervously. "No," Sable replied. I want them to dive against us. He rolled his jug over, nose facing earth. Gravity grabbed them. The dive began. Here we go again. The altimeter spun. Wind howled around the canopy. The thunderbolt didn't just fall, she plummeted, vibrating like a living creature. The paddle blade propeller carved the air, stabilizing the nose, feeding air into the engine at a rate that made the R-2800 scream. The 109 pilots expected the jugs to break off, but Blue Flight went deeper, faster, straighter. Delaney shouted, "Jesus, Sable! I'm redlining!" "Hold it!" Sable roared. At 450 miles per hour, the world blurred. At 470 miles per hour, Sable felt the controls stiffen just like Berlin. Don't break. Not now. At 480 miles per hour, the 109 seconds began to lose nerve. They broke off first. Sable jerked the stick back, pulling the jug into a brutal climb. The gay forces slammed him into the seat like a collapsing building, his vision greyed. He tasted metal. He prayed the wings didn't shear off. And then he levelled out at 19,000 feet, and every Messerschmitt that chased him was now below him. Delaney gasped over the radio. "That's impossible. That's not physics. That's what the hell did we just do?" Sable didn't answer. He simply dove again. And the wolf pack descended with him, like a pack of blades falling from heaven. The fight lasted 5 more minutes. 5 brutal, chaotic minutes. When the sky finally cleared, Blue Flight had downed 7 enemy fighters. The Germans had scored 0. Bombers continued their run unmolested. As they formed up to head home, Delaney's voice was quiet, less joking, more reverent. "Sable, what did they do to our planes?" Pike added, nervous awe in his voice. "It's not just more power. It's like the whole aircraft changed personality." Sable stared at the horizon. He had the exact same fear, because today wasn't luck, nor yesterday. The data was too consistent. The P-47 Thunderbolt with the paddle blade prop wasn't an upgrade. It was a metamorphosis, a weapon the Germans didn't understand, a weapon that even the Americans barely understood. And, as the English coast came into view, Sable realized, their war had changed, and every German pilot who survived today would warn the others. The next time they met, the Luftwaffe would come prepared. The question, the terrifying, thrilling question, was whether the jug's new propeller still held one more surprise, one more card no one had seen yet. Sable hoped so, because he had a feeling the war was about to get worse before it got better. March 8th, 1944, RAF, Halesworth, England, 1,120 hours. News travelled fast in war, but fear travelled faster. Before Blue Flight even taxied back from debrief, whispers were already ricocheting across the base like ricocheting 50 cal rounds. Mechanics stared at the returning P-47 seconds in open disbelief. Pilots from other squadrons gathered near dispersal areas, observing the paddle blade props like they were alien artifacts bolted onto American armour. A crew chief muttered as Sable walked by, "Those blades don't make sense. They shouldn't give that kind of acceleration. They just shouldn't," a radio operator added. German intercepts lit up all morning. They're scrambling to figure out what happened over Hanover. Sable didn't answer. He didn't have answers. All he had were the same questions gnawing at every pilot in the wolf pack. Was the paddle blade prop some weird aerodynamic miracle? A fluke? A design accident that unlocked performance no one intended? Or was it something darker, a rush job breakthrough so new and so fragile that one bad fight could shatter the illusion? He stepped into the briefing hut, still smelling faint traces of burned cordite from the fight. Inside, Colonel Hub Zemke sat with his flight leaders around a long, map-lined table. Steam rose from a coffee pot that had died hours ago but refused to accept it. Zemke didn't look up when Sable entered, he just tapped a pencil once on the wood. "Shut the door, Merriweather." Sable obeyed. Zemke exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. Gentlemen, you're not going to like this. Major Johnson stood and turned over a sheet of decoded intercept text. Last night, Luftwaffe High Command ordered JG-11, JG-26, and JG-300 to shift operations towards central Germany. Their instructions mention specifically new Thunderbolt performance capabilities. Pike muttered. They're mobilizing entire wings. Over a propeller change? Zemke nodded grimly. They think we're fielding a secret super variant of the P-47. They believe yesterday and today were the unveiling. And they're not wrong, Delaney said under his breath. Zemke continued. German reports call these Thunderbolt's Razormessers, Johnson translated. Razor blades. Sable frowned. Why that name? Zemke pointed at the chalkboard, drawing the paddle blade propeller with its wide, angled silhouette. To them, these blades, these props, look like cutting tools, something designed to slice the air differently. After today's fight, every Luftwaffe squadron within reach of our bomber corridors will be hunting a new kind of P-47. They're preparing to adapt. Silence weighted the room. Then Johnson laid out a fresh sheet. This morning's heavy reconnaissance flight over Bremen encountered something new. Me 109 seconds diving in coordinated packs, ignoring escorts until the last moment. They're trying to drag us into maneuver traps. Pike grimaced. They're studying us. Correct, Zemke said. They've realized the Thunderbolt no longer behaves like the brick it used to be. So they are searching for new weaknesses. Sable shifted uncomfortably. What did Recon report? Johnson's voice hardened. They nearly succeeded. Zemke dimmed the hut's overhead lights and clipped a series of photographs to the display board. Grainy black and white stills from a gun camera. The images showed a terrifying sight. 109 seconds diving in synchronized. Formation not on bombers but on P-47 seconds. Ignoring their traditional doctrine entirely, Johnson narrated. Recon Flight 6 was bounced by 24 Me 109 G-14 seconds. They stayed in high-altitude slashing patterns. No turning, no prolonged dogfights. Their objective was to force the P-47 seconds into energy depletion by stacking vertical attacks. Sable frowned. Since when do they coordinate dives like that? Zemke replied without hesitation. This morning. A long beat passed. The Germans adapt fast, Sable whispered. And they're going to adapt faster, Zemke growled. But we adapt faster still. That's why we win. He tapped the table sharply. Which brings me to you, Merriweather. Sable straightened. Zemke leaned forward, eyes sharp. You have demonstrated something we didn't know was possible. Twice now. You flew a Thunderbolt like it weighed half its actual mass. You executed a vertical trap that should have gotten you killed. Sable opened his mouth to speak, but Zemke raised a hand. Don't be modest. We all saw the combat film. Johnson hit the projector switch. The footage flickered to life, grainy, jittering film of Sable's dive over Hanover. The canopy vibrations made the horizon dance. The altimeter needle spun so fast it became a blur. Zemke's voice narrated, Observe the rate of descent. That's 25% faster than the previous P-47D models. Now observe the climb. The reel showed Sable's jug pulling upward sharply, the camera shaking violently from G-force. A silver, Me-109 stalled ahead, then erupted into flame as Sable's tracers hit home. Johnson paused the film. Merriweather, that's probably the first recorded instance of a P-47 outclimbing a Messerschmitt in the same maneuver window. Mouths hung open around the room. Sable felt heat climb his neck. Sir, I didn't do anything special. It was the new blades. No, Zemke said firmly. You were the first pilot, brave or insane enough to push them that far. Zemke told everyone except Sable to step outside for 10 minutes. The men all exchanged surprised looks. Delaney hesitated but obeyed. Only Sable stayed seated. Zemke pulled a weathered folder from his desk drawer and tossed it across the table. The cover bore a single marking, R2800 Performance Anomalies. Experimental Test Division Right Field, Confidential Sable blinked. "Sir, open it." He did. Inside were handwritten test notes, charts, engine diagnostic sheets, propeller harmonics diagrams. But what caught his attention first was a line written in pencil by a test pilot. Paddle blade prop induces unexpected low-altitude acceleration. Airframe strain within acceptable limits. Recommend extreme caution. Below it, another line. Feels like the plane comes alive below 15,000 feet. Then a later note. Behavior unpredictable at transonic dives. Unknown limits. Sable looked up. Why wasn't this shared with us before the upgrade? This is huge. Because those tests weren't finished, Zemke said quietly. Command rushed production after we started losing too many fighters in deep escort missions. They didn't wait for full results. Sable exhaled, hard, angry. They gambled with us. They gambled with the war, Zemke corrected. And yesterday we learned they might have accidentally created the best air superiority tool we've ever had. Sable read more. Pages of red ink annotations, trailing edge turbulence charts, torque variance estimates. He froze at one paragraph. Sustained dive over 460 miles per hour may create a temporary airflow compression bubble along fuselage, reducing drag unexpectedly. Hypothesis. Paddle blades modify shock boundary onset. He blinked. Sir, is this saying the propeller might be delaying compressibility? Zemke leaned back. We don't know yet, but evidence suggests something about the blade geometry affects how the air packs around the fuselage at high speed. Sable swallowed. If true, if even partially true, it meant the P-47 could dive deeper, faster, and more controlled than any piston fighter in the theatre. And the Germans would learn that very soon. The briefing door swung open. The rest of the flight leaders returned. Zemke switched gears instantly. Gentlemen, listen carefully. Starting tomorrow, the Wolfpack will run a new strike pattern. He drew 2 long vertical lines on the operations map. Model 1. Climb to 28,000 over the bomber stream. Model 2. Engage Luftwaffe vertical packs head-on. Model 3. He tapped the second line. You dive? Pike blinked. Dive where? Ahead of the Germans, Zemke said. Johnson elaborated. We want them to follow you down. We force them into our energy envelope. Make them overcommit. Delaney frowned. That's backwards of everything we've done. We never dive before the enemy initiates. That was before the paddle blade, Zemke said coldly. Now we have a weapon they haven't solved yet. We control the vertical now. We take advantage. Sable felt a tremor of excitement. And dread. Because if they were changing tactics, that meant headquarters believed the Germans would escalate again. Zemke concluded, Tomorrow's mission is Bremen. Expect the full weight of the Luftwaffe. And for those who haven't gotten used to your new props, you'd better by morning. Dinner was a quiet affair. Pilots ate mechanically, replaying the day in their minds like men reading letters from ghosts. The base generator hummed in the distance. A radio played soft Glenn Miller somewhere. Outside the mess hall window, Sable saw the shapes of the Thunderbolts parked under canvas covers, their oversized paddle blades silhouetted in the moonlight like executioner axes resting before work resumed. From him, dropping a tin tray. You're thinking too much, he said. Sable snorted. You're not thinking enough. Delaney shrugged. That's why I sleep better than you. He stabbed a fork into powdered potatoes. Tomorrow will be rough. They're probably planning a revenge party. Bring your best suit. Sable rubbed his temples. Frank, if these blades really are doing what Zemke thinks delaying compressibility, redistributing torque, we're flying prototypes thrown into combat. Delaney blinked once, then twice, then shrugged again. Everything in this war is a prototype thrown into combat. Sable sighed. Frank leaned forward. Look, maybe we should stop being scared the plane's going to break, and start being scared of what it can do if it doesn't break. Sable looked at him, surprised by the rare moment of seriousness. Delaney finished, voice quiet. "Tomorrow, the Germans come for us, and we'll be ready." Crimson. The kind of sunrise that made superstitious men mutter warnings. Razor winds cut across the airfield as the wolf pack prepped for takeoff. Mechanics muttered to each other in clipped, anxious tones. Ground crews double-checked every bolt on the new props twice. Sable climbed into Gallows Dancer and strapped in tightly. His stomach churned. Delaney's voice crackled through the radio. "Sable, you alive?" "Barely." "Good. Means you'll fly smart." Pike joined. "My money says we see 200 Germans today." "Too low," Delaney said. "Too optimistic," Sable muttered. "Throttle up, prop bites. Engines roar like thunder gods waking." The wolf pack launched into a blood-red sky. They met the Luftwaffe east of Bremen. Not 15 fighters. Not 20. 60. Me 109 seconds and W 190 seconds, ranks of silver and black streaks across the horizon. Pike let out a low whistle. "Dear God," Delaney's voice sharpened. "They brought everyone." Zemke's voice cut. Through the radio. "Wolfpack, remember your training. We own the vertical now. Blue Flight Merryweather, initiate Model 3. Sable inhaled. "Blue Flight on me." They rolled over into a dive. Every German fighter saw it. Every German fighter chased. The trap was sprung. The diving formation of P-47 seconds looked like a rain of anvils. The Germans followed like wolves leaping off a cliff. Wind screamed in Sable's cockpit. The prop bit harder. The aircraft surged to 430 miles per hour, then 450, then 470. Hold together. Hold together, hold together. The 109 seconds dove too. Too fast, too committed, too late to turn. Sable's altimeter spun. "Pull!" he yelled. Blue Flight yanked their sticks. The thunderbolts clawed upward, bending air like steel. The 109 seconds tried to follow, but they stalled. One after another, their noses pitched up, wings trembling, engines choking. They hung mid-air like broken marionettes. Sable rolled behind the first Me 109 and fired. A burst, a blossom, of flame. Delaney ripped apart a second. Pike shredded a third. The Germans were falling, dragged into the razor teeth of the wolf pack. And in that moment, Sable understood. The paddle blade prop wasn't just an upgrade. It was a weapon the enemy didn't understand. A mistake that became a miracle. A miracle that became American doctrine. The sky belonged to the Thunderbolts now, at least for today. The fight raged for 10 more minutes. When the air finally cleared, the Wolfpack had dropped 15 enemy fighters and scattered the rest. Bombers reached Bremen with minimal harassment. As they reformed, Delaney broke the silence. "Sable, I think this war just tilted." Sable looked out over the endless sky, the stage for their battles, their fear, their triumphs. He thought of the test files Zemke had shown him, the notes, the warnings, the miracles, and he whispered, "It tilted the moment we put these blades on." Dawn bled slowly across the cloud tops, staining the world in muted gold as Lieutenant Harris nursed his wounded Thunderbolt back toward friendly lines. The engine, normally a roaring, eager beast, now throbbed unevenly, coughing oil across the canopy in greasy arcs. Every vibration felt like a prayer running out of time. He glanced over his shoulder. Nothing. The German, who had nearly ended him, the red-nosed butcher in the butchered sky, was gone, swallowed by darkness or wreckage miles behind. Harris didn't know. He only knew he was alive because the paddle blade prop had dragged his crippled P-47 through the fight long enough to strike back. Below, the war raged on across Berlin. Black flak blooms reached upward like skeletal hands, clawing at his wings as he descended. Every few seconds, he expected the engine to seize. Every few seconds, it didn't. Somehow, the blade kept biting air. "Thunderbolt 2-1, we've got you Vector 170, bring her home." The radio call snapped him back. Friendly voices. Friendly. Life. He followed the heading. limping low across the shattered outskirts of the capital until the jagged lines of the Allied advance came into view. A makeshift airstrip appeared ahead, nothing more than torn earth, smoking fuel drums, and a windsock clinging to its pole like a dying flag. But it was enough. Harris coaxed the plane down. The moment the wheels touched, the right strut collapsed, sending the Thunderbolt grinding sideways in a shriek of metal and dust. When the world finally stopped moving, Harris found himself staring at a cracked instrument panel and his own trembling hands. Crewmen sprinted toward him. One yanked open the canopy. "Jesus, Lieutenant! What the hell happened up there?" Harris exhaled, the adrenaline still burning in his blood. "Germany learned something today," he said, stepping down from the ruined cockpit. "The Thunderbolt isn't done evolving." He looked back at his battered fighter. "And neither are we. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.